Hi Bruno, Jeff Allen here. Just saw your post on this article from the Atlantic about the difference between speaking and thinking, and I've been considering doing something on this recently. Actually, I've been made a couple videos that have gone in this direction. But here, I'll try to kind of summarize this, and maybe I'll bring those into a playlist or something. We'll see how that works, but. Yeah, in fact, I've made differences on speaking and writing, and so I want to expand that because this is about thinking here, and I think this is an interesting point. There's a difference between thinking and speaking, and there's a difference between speaking and writing and reading, and this has come out in some webinars and stuff. We've kind of been mentioning this in different places. Thinking. It's this flow of thoughts, right? Just a flow of thoughts. It's just massive brainstorming in your brain, right? In your mind. What happens then is when you speak from a neuro-linguistic point of view, okay? I'm coming at this from a neuro-linguistic point of view of having worked in it in linguistics and having worked in first language acquisition and second language acquisition, production, and everything. That as a phonetician, as a phonologist, I think about production because I see what is underlying competency and what is behavior and which happens at the surface level. You can have underlying level and you can have surface level of what happens, and that's why people make errors. People might make errors, but it may not reflect what they're able to really do. It's just that they may have had a little glitch at some point in time. A tongue twister happens, something, But it doesn't mean that they don't know. It just means at that moment in time, a different behavior, a different pronunciation, a different word came out. But the next sentence, they can have it completely correct, right? And more appropriate. So thinking is this flow of thoughts. Speaking is where you want to actually, what I'm doing right now, I'm taking that flow and I'm because I'm speaking extemporaneously right now, right? I'm not writing anything down. I'm not trying to organize it any more than this. Now I'm going to get to that. I'm just speaking, but I've got a flow of thoughts. So I'm trying to focus on where I want to explain something in some order. That's what we do when you talk, right? Well, most people. Okay, so anyone that really speaks, you're actually filtering out what you want to do, what you want to talk about, and then it becomes kind of the point, and the specific points you want to address. Everybody does, all right? But then, reading and writing is another level, and I would like to shout out to Tim Brooks, who's in the Endangered Language Alphabet Project. He's had a few webinars on Sundays recently in his series, and it's been really interesting because I've been attending some of those and got to make some comments on one or two of them, but it's come up as the difference between reading and writing, and these are two different things, though the means and the media may be similar. The media may be similar. That is the writing alphabet or orthography. The means to do things are different because reading, you can read passively and not having learned to write. Now, this is usually not the case, right? It's possible to do this. Okay? And the proof of that is people that can read music notation, right? If people learn to read musical notes, just read it and understand what it is. They don't have to learn to write it. That helps. It does help because it creates another action, another means of memorization. But you don't have to do it. You can just learn to read it and be told what it is and recognize it. And be able to recognize it and so on. Now, usually what happens is we teach people how to write in order to teach them how to read. We use both in combination, whether it be music notation, whether it be alphabets for, any language. We tend to do that. In fact, we do this a lot. And so then we teach people that they can produce the writing for others to read. But it doesn't have to be that way. And so these are two different things. And actually, and that's why I want to get to your point here about the speaking and thinking, is that reading is a passive activity. It's a passive event. And so just reading content to consume is different than you want to write it down and communicate. These are two different actions and activities. And I remember someone talking about, this is like doing videos is way different for me than doing writing down. And the problem with writing down, and I can do this, but the problem is it takes way more time, because you really have to focus on what you want to say in bullet points or something. To say bullet point 1, then sub lists here and this to communicate, because you want to get it really concise, because no one's going to sit there and read prose, except for books, right? Whereas in a video, you can kind of expound on these things and expand on them, explaining the points and this and that way, but you don't have to do it in such tweet kind of manners, right? You have to do this in tweets. Some people do, but that's where I think where we can distinguish between thinking and speaking. And speaking and listening is two different things, right? Children are able to hear and understand more before they're able to speak. Okay, so this is something to think about here. Again, we need to distinguish. To think is we can all do. Then we're able to listen and hear and understand before we're able to speak, at least comprehensively speak, right? Children are the kind of way when they're 1.5 years old, they start trying to talk, and you don't understand them really until about 3, right? Yeah, it kind of depends on the child, depends on how much your intonation levels are and stuff, and if you're getting good at filtering and figure it out with whatever they're doing, right? Whatever their movements are in gestural kind of gestures. Then the reading and writing is reading as a passive activity. Well, it's not passive. You're doing it, but you're consuming to gain something. Writing is where you're focusing on trying to communicate. And I think that there are different levels at each one of these things. And I think once we get down to mastering, or whatever word we want to use for that, I don't want to use the master, but we're good. Once you become good at each one of these levels, then they all become this flow or this spectrum of different separate tasks. Whereas when you're learning how to speak, well, you're learning how to hear and understand, but you don't have a choice. You're just stuck in it. You're in your mother tongue language, right? You're around people that speak all the time, except for Jeannie, who was locked in the box, right? But in the basement, but you're passively listening all the time, and so you're hearing and you're learning and trying to form things. But then when you're learning to speak, that's a more productive activity, which forces you to try to pronounce the things. It's a lot more strenuous, it's a lot more difficult, it's a much more difficult cognitive activity and physical activity than listening. Okay, listening, you're only making the just your eardrums are pretty much the things that are capturing things. The rest is, but when you're speaking, but you got the tongue, you got your mouth, you got your jaw, you've got all kinds of activities. You got your vocal cords, everything's in action, and it's a lot harder activity. And then reading and writing, same kind of thing. We can apply it to that. Reading is eye movement with brain. The rest, maybe flipping the page, okay, or scrolling with your fingers. But writing is a manual activity where you have to actually form the letters, and they all need to go together, or letters, whatever you want to, pictograms, what do you want to call these characters, right? So I think that this is really interesting. I think that we don't talk about enough about this, and Tim Brooks was has been going in that direction. I think that's been really good, and I think this article in the Atlantic really emphasizes the difference. And now we have to think about the whole thing of the AI approach and how this is going to do in generating generative AI and all that. I think this is going to be something that will. I think we're going to see a lot of new articles and papers on this kind of thing. I think this will be a really interesting thing. I'll be looking out for it, and maybe talking a little bit more about this kind of stuff. I need to do a little more. I've just brainstormed this idea of reading this article or just looking at this. I haven't thought any more about it. I just pull up the camera and say we got to do a little video on this topic because I think it's worth talking about because of the difference in language, right? There are different levels of language. And I don't think we actually we talk about this or refer to it. And it all comes from starting with thinking. Gets down to the more advanced levels of communication. And I haven't even gone down to drawing yet. And I can't talk about that because I really suck at drawing. I really suck at it. I can make, stick people. So it works for teaching. But there are a lot of people who can do a lot better drawing, and they're a lot better communicating that ways. So, okay, have a good day.